recording. And I'm going to open the door. There's only 9 people right now. All right. Good morning, everybody. We're going to be hanging out here for a few minutes while people are joining us. Good to see everybody. Good to see you, Denny. We're going to have you guys all muted at first here. It's a fairly small group today, so hopefully we'll be able to have some conversation along with listening to what Yvonne has to say. So if everybody just hang out for a moment, make sure you have some coffee. We're going to give it a few more minutes, let people trickle in before we get started.
Morning, everyone. If you're joining in, I had the fun experience of dropping my computer last week. It's broken, and so I'm having to use a separate screen. So you're looking at me sideways this morning.
While you guys are waiting, make sure you're familiar with your controls here. We've got a chat feature. If you want to say something or ask a question, that's the place to throw a question, and I will be monitoring that, and we'll bring it to Yvonne's attention, or she may see it herself. That's a great spot for us to sort of have the conversation going as we go. Sure you guys are all on mute. Thomas joining us now. So while we're waiting here, I'll just sort of go through the how to participate guidelines here. If you've been with us before, this is not anything new. We can see you. You've been muted. Please try to stay that way unless we call on you, unless one of us unmutes you. I'm not sure we've got the raise your hand feature. I wasn't seeing that, but if it's there, go ahead and use it if you've got a question, but otherwise you can throw it in the chat. We definitely want you to ask questions. Use the chat tool to do that. We'll either answer directly in the chat tool or we'll throw that question to Yvonne and have her answer for the group. We definitely want you to share your thoughts, but again, you know, we're expecting about 30 people in the group today, so we've got some time to chat, but we also want to be respectful of others. Like I said, we're monitoring the Q&A on this. If you do have questions or more comments or a more detailed comment you'd like to make, you can always throw those to us at questions@evergreenmtb.org. We get quite a few questions through that channel. We try to answer them as quickly as we can, and we always try and put you connect with the right person to answer whatever question you might have. So with that, I always forget because I feel like you guys already know me, but the beginning of the slide told you who I am. I'm Patrick Walker. I'm the marketing manager for Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance. I handle all the statewide marketing and communications. And with us today is Yvonne Kraus, who is our executive director. And Yvonne, it looks like we've got about 15 people with us. So I think I'm going to just go ahead and hand this off to you now. We can go ahead and get started. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Awesome. I'll share mine in a second. Good morning, everyone. So good to have you here. This is going to be a really good discussion this morning. I struggle with this topic the most. It's become very prevalent in all of what we do, very important to address, to become more familiar with, to better integrate in all of the work that we do. And so today I'll just show the items, the regulations, and the initiatives that have come up recently, and then really trying to better understand how we as mountain bikers can collaborate and do better. Right now, I'll talk about this a little bit, but what we do is we follow the legal process, right? And there's very little collaboration upfront. And that's being called out, not just for mountain biking, for all recreation on the land, right? Through multiple tribes. And yet for us, the environment on how to do it better is not yet clear, right? So we're learning, we're trying to understand, we're trying to reach out earlier, and I will need help to do that. So I see we have at least one tribal member with us. So I wanted to start with who here actually is a member of a tribe, and just use your raise your hand feature. And then what we'll do is get back, I'll have you introduce yourself real quick. And Patrick, we can use the raise hand feature, right? Through reactions?
I think it's in the reactions, yeah.
Yes,
So
if you are a member of a
there's a raise
tribe.
hand.
Okay. Okay, and I think, McKenna, you're with us, right? All right, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, sorry I'm late. My name is McKenna. I work with the DEI committee, and good morning.
Good morning. Okay, and then anyone here have experience working with tribes or a reference through work, a direct project with tribes? If so, raise your hand. Just trying to get a sense of the landscape and who's with us. Okay, doesn't look like it. All right, so we're all here to learn this morning. I'm going to share my screen. And again, if you joined a little bit late, you're looking at me sideways this morning. I dropped my computer and I am using a second screen to make this all come together. And if my computer is a little jumpy here and there, that's why my screen is completely cracked and broken. Can you all see my slideshow? Patrick, can you give me a quick thumbs up? Okay, sweet. So I look at this screen. So here you go. We're going to talk about the challenge, what's happening on the land, what are the tribes saying, what initiatives are coming up, and what do we need to know both as mountain bikers, but also as planners of projects, right? And as maintenance crew on the land, in terms of the new requirements or new collaboration opportunities that are out there. And then I really just want to talk about opportunities. What are your ideas in which we can work better? How are you maybe willing to help? Much of this work is about listening, learning, and relationship building, and that takes time and it takes people. And it really requires outreach to better understand the people who have been on the lands and on the trails that we have built, but the people who have been there since time immemorial, and understanding their needs and understanding our role as mountain bikers on the land, right? So I just want to talk about opportunities, and hopefully ideas, suggestions, or initiatives may come out of this that we'll do a follow-up coffee, or it becomes part of our DEI initiatives that McKenna and her committee can work on or take on, right? So that's kind of the idea for today, and hopefully ending just in discussion. Any thoughts, questions before we get started? Items that are burning questions or issues for you, you can always use the chat, as Patrick mentioned. All right, and Patrick, I'll need your help. I can't see the chat while I'm in presentation mode.
Yep, nope, looks like everybody's good to go, and we can
Cool.
keep
All right,
moving.
you guys. So about 5 challenges that I want to go over, and we just all need to know about these. We need to be aware of them. And there are also resources that I can pull up. I've got them all pulled up if you want to learn more about them. I've got either the reports pulled up or the websites pulled up. And I'll share with you a link to most of these resources. So number one, I mean, I think many of you know many projects or multiple projects are either on hold or delayed or are getting scoped down due to tribal concerns. The first challenge that we ran into was a request by the Tulalip tribe to the Department of Natural Resources about the recreation impacts within the Highway 2 corridor. That happened back in 2019, I believe. And the Tulalip asked for an evaluation of the recreation impact on the land, particularly to wildlife and habitat that was affecting their usual and accustomed areas for either ritual or foraging or hunting traditions. And the Tulalip tribe released a recreation report, a recreation impact report that you're seeing there. The projects that were asked to go on hold, or at least are not seeing much forward momentum in planning, are Maloney Rock, Reeder, Alpine Baldy, and that's in the Highway 2 corridor. Now, I will say that Alpine Baldy is still technically moving forward. That was already approved, good to go. We're waiting for phase 2 to be added. That comes with some of its own challenges within the Forest Service. So Alpine Baldy hopefully can still continue, but Maloney Rock, which was an entirely new recreation system, is completely on hold, and I don't believe it'll start up anytime soon. So they released this impact study that you should read if you haven't already. It's again funded and completed by the Tulalip tribe. Really just looking at the pressures on our public lands and waterways. And the key finding, which I have an excerpt of it here, is that we shouldn't treat what we're seeing on the land right now as a one-off caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's really a preview of what the future holds in our region and underscores the need to better plan, to better manage the use on the land. So really interesting report, significant. I have a copy of it pulled up, and again, I'll follow up with links to all of these resources. So that was sort of the initial Highway 2 corridor went on hold back in 2019. Then Snoqualmie tribe is becoming more and more concerned about recreation impacts within the I-90 corridor, and the project's affected by their request to evaluate recreation impacts. Our Raging River, as we all know, and then the Middle Fork, which doesn't affect us too much, but there are some mountain bike resources or at least trails being planned there that would be affected or perhaps reduced in scope. And then Olali. Olali, similar to Alpine Baldy Phase 2, it's already been completely approved. It's gone through all the permitting requirements. And so hopefully that will still get completed. Technically, the requirements to inform the tribes about this were completed. They had an opportunity in the planning process, and fingers crossed that that moves forward as planned, starting as early as this fall, we hope. But we're certainly aware of it and need to make sure that we engage the tribe in ongoing work there. So Snoqualmie launched the Ancestral Land Movement, and Denny, thanks again for reaching out to me when that came out as well, right? Denny emailed me and said, we really need to get engaged. I agree. There's a link in my presentation here on where you can find the details on the Ancestral Lands Movement, but really the concept of it is important and pretty darn clear, right? We need to treat the lands with the respect they deserve. We need to experience the lands in a way that's centered in mindfulness rather than a conquest, right? And then we need to understand the tribe better and its history and the connection to the lands here in the I-90 corridor, Snoqualmie corridor. And then helping the tribe spread its message, right? So what can we do in education And what can we do in acknowledging the lands and spiritual places in our planning practices. Number 3, this is a challenge and also a really great opportunity. So we'll talk about this a little bit more, particularly for those of you who have interest in this. So I just met with this wonderful trio up in Colville, Washington, and met with Shelley Boyd, a tribal representative of Colville, to talk about the challenges on the land there. This was pre-fire. This was about a week before the fire started there. So I missed that, but as a result of fires, additional actions are being taken. I think some of you may know that the Colville are suing the Colville National Forest for mismanagement of the forest that's creating and causing fires and disease. So that's a lawsuit that's happening right now. But the Colville tribes and the Upper Columbia United Tribes are engaged in a major landscape planning and salmon restoration initiative that doesn't directly affect projects yet, but presents both a challenge and an opportunity for us to, again, do planning right and plan projects together, and even plan our trail maintenance projects together, right? So one of the things that's happening there that is an opportunity for us is that we've been asked by Bobby Whitaker, the gentleman in the center there, to engage in a renaming effort for the forest to integrate culturally appropriate naming, right? Let's get rid of pretty awful people that are that this forest is named after, both Colville and then Sherman for Sherman Pass. Let's eliminate those names from the forest and instead treat the forest and rename the forest to the land of the people. And that's something that Shelley is leading. I think it's an opportunity for us. Shelley was amazing to meet with. She wants a little bit of wilderness. She also wants people on the land. She wants mountain bikers on the land. She wants people to be able to access and enjoy the land, but we must take care of the land as well. The link there shows you the UCOT work that they're doing. It's all about fish. And one thing that really stuck with me is Shelley's words during the meeting. That's that she said, if we can save salmon, we can save the world. The issue or the challenge in saving salmon and how broad their territory is and how much is affected to save the fish. If we can figure that out, we can save the world. So I've just kind of kept that in mind in our importance to work with them and figure out what our role is there again. Fourth challenge, I only got 2 more left, so hang in there. So the fourth challenge is now the planning projects that are affected due to tribal concerns. So the Northwest Indian Fishery Commission sent a letter to the governor. It was signed by, I believe, 11 tribes. I can look that up. To ask the governor to engage the tribes at the earliest phases of recreation planning. And while right now we have a legal requirement to engage tribes, and I send a letter, informing the tribes whose land we're on that a project is planned. I recently had to do that for the Tahale project, for example. It's just a legal step, and oftentimes we do not hear back. So it's a legal requirement. There is no response very often, and there's a reason for that I'll explain. But it's not an environment of collaboration. It's simply a legal step. This letter requests that it's time to treat the treaty tribes in Washington State, as they are sovereign governments, as natural resource co-managers, right? And to engage them early in the planning, even at the RCO process for funding. So that would really change the way in which we collaborate upfront with the tribes and make it more meaningful, frankly. Right now, I do not have a direct collaborative environment, and we need to reach out ourselves as mountain bikers to make that happen. And last one, Governor's Executive Order 2102, which formerly was Rule 0505. That's an executive order that affects all of our projects now and requires our trail crew to go through training. And it's really just to undergo a cultural resource review anytime the landscape is affected. If we have a project that's already permitted, even when the trails are in place, if we go outside of the corridor that has gone through a cultural resource review, let's say there's a trail reroute, you're outside of the permitted and flagged trail corridor, anytime you dig in the earth more than 6 inches deep, a cultural review needs to happen. And our crew has gone through that. It's been a significant effort in King County. And we're seeing that, really affecting all of our projects now. And it's a new crew training requirement. And it's good. It's just, we didn't even know this existed for a long time, right? So about 2 years ago, I believe, is the first time we did a training with King County. So those are the 5 sort of key things to know, the key challenges, I would say, between Tulalip, Snoqualmie, and Colville. Those are the 3 main tribes we're paying attention to in terms of where our projects are, where our opportunities are, and where we're most affected. But this is growing, and it's growing fast. For example, Crystal Mountain is Muckleshoot. I have not directly connected with Muckleshoot, but the resort certainly has, right? So I assume and expect this to grow to ultimately engage all 20 federally recognized tribes and beyond in Washington state. So I'll stop there for a second, see if there's questions, but that's really the landscape that I've learned. I'm by no means an expert in all of this. I am learning. I'm trying to absorb and reach out as best as I can. So I'll stop for a second here. Patrick, if you can monitor the chat, I can't see it at the moment.
Yeah, Yvonne. Well, so far everybody seems to be getting what they need from you here. Folks, if you do have a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat, and or
Alex has a question.
I'm okay with you trying. Oh, Alex.
Hey, thanks very much.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm with CODA in Central Oregon, and this is super interesting. I'm somewhat new to the planning process, and I know NEPA looks at, has archaeologists go out and look for cultural issues, but are they just looking at the past, or is there any process part of NEPA where they do reach out for, to tribes and ask these kind of questions?
Yeah, absolutely. There's the cultural resource review happens as part of that process, basically walking the entire trail corridor. And then it's about cultural artifacts in that case, right? So digging, looking at artifacts, looking at whether anything is found. The hard part is and this is what makes this subject in the planning so very difficult. When something is found, the cultural resource expert will note that the artifact is sometimes brought in for review and study and documentation, and then put back into the soil. So you don't take it away. And that means that once the artifact is put back into the soil, depending on what that artifact was, it's a area of significance, right? So our trail corridor may be altered, but we are not, there's a statewide database, and I don't know how this works in Oregon or how this even is done nationwide. I'm talking Washington state here, Alex, so just keep that in mind. With NEPA, I'm not quite sure what the national requirements are around that. But here in Washington state, the artifact is then put back into the soil. That site is documented, the artifact is documented, but we are not allowed to know or understand really, well, I shouldn't say understand. We're not allowed to know, the public is not allowed to know what was found or where exactly it was found, right? Because of the concern of vandalism. And so there is a statewide database that documents all of these findings. There's a statewide database that documents spiritual sites and locations. We do not have access to that, which makes planning really difficult, because if we are planning in an area that has sacred spiritual sites of significance, even throughout the process, we will not find out. And that's something that will put Mike, and myself into a situation of putting trails in places where they shouldn't be. And yet there's very little we can do about that, right? So how we work through that is a challenge. So for NEPA, it's required. Exactly how that works at the national level, I'm not sure of, Alex, but it's a walking of the corridor, and it's usually digging holes at a certain distance from each other. I can't remember what that is, but along the entire trail corridor.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yvonne, we got a couple of questions. One, I want to respond to Sarah's question of why does any trail require digging more than 4 inches deep? Sarah, that's a complicated answer, and it all depends on the terrain and the soil types that are there. But in order to build a sustainable trail, we essentially have to remove all the organic matter over the soil where we can find the mineral soil underneath, and that really becomes a more sustainable trail bed. So that's a much more complicated question that if Mike Westerode here, he would spend an hour with you explaining all the details on that. So unfortunately, we do have to dig in order to build sustainable trails for grade, for drainage, for tread. So there's a lot more to that answer, and please feel free to reach out if you need more to that. Jason's asking if the cultural review process impacts maintenance projects and to include reroutes and route altercation.
Yes.
And Thomas is wondering if we're going to include cultural resource training for other parts of the organization, such as instructors or committee members in the future.
Yeah, so I think, so the first question, absolutely. So at Black Diamond and at DC, if we go outside of the existing trail corridor, we will, even for maintenance with reroutes, if it's within a certain distance, we have to stop and call in the cultural resource expert. They come out. Luckily, she is awesome and she responds really quickly, so we're not on hold too long, but they come out and do an evaluation before we can continue to dig. So that's mostly happening, like I said, in King County for now. Other areas are a little slower in getting that resource capacity set up, but they're now required by law to do so. Thomas, from an education perspective, I'm not quite sure how it translates to the soil and maintenance piece of it, since we would normally be working on trail that have gone through the process with youth, right? But I'm assuming that you're interested in sort of the cultural training and engaging tribal members, how to bring terminology, tribal references to the curriculum, things like that. And that's a great opportunity that I'd like to talk more about. Let me know if I misunderstood that, but to do training with the tribes at that level and to better educate our team and all of our members and the people who take our classes in how to talk about the land and whose land are you on and what trail are we on and what's special about the land would be really would be great to include in our curriculum.
And then the last, Paul's wondering where tribes are on e-bikes. Is that part of the discussion? Is that an additional concern, or is it just a concern that sort of overlays just a general recreational use concern?
Yeah, there's no separate discussion about e-bikes right now. It really is just the impact of recreation on the land and our waterways, right? So this is not a mountain bike specific issue. It is everything. It's who's climbing our sacred peaks, who is swimming in our waterfalls and ponds, what habitat are we affecting, and treating poorly, frankly, right? If you read the recreation report, if you read the Northwest Fisheries Indian Commission letter, it is about the footprint that we leave on the land, and it is significant. So e-bikes are not part of this. I haven't had that conversation yet. I think this is really more about starting with us recognizing that we have a role, that we have an impact. What can we do to work together, you know, and how can we keep our footprint on the land as respectful as possible?
Sarah's got one last question, I think, before we move on to the next piece here, Yvonne. She's curious about if the tribes are involved in trail planning outside of the reservations, aside from cultural concerns. And Sarah, please feel free to unmute, but I think you're asking, are they involved more in the initial steps, or is it more of a check at the once a trail is identified and planned? If you'd like to unmute and maybe clarify what you're asking, that would be great. Not sure if Sarah can unmute. So Yvonne, I think the question specifically is, where do the tribes get involved? Is it from the beginning in the planning of a trail, or is it once a trail is planned, the corridor is identified, and then the tribe comes in? And
well, let me give you a crude answer, Sarah, and that is not at all from where I've been, right? So that's the problem, and it's a big problem. So like I said here, actually, I'll go to the next slide and just show you this. And again, sorry, juggling these screens here to try and make it work. So the very first bullet on here, you know, what's been our approach on this subject? Well, little to no direct collaboration. For us, it has truly been a legal requirement. The last one I had to do was the Tahale project. I simply send a letter, I inform. It is for the tribes who have the treaty rights and, let's say, usual and accustomed lands, right? I'm still learning my terminology here, but which tribes either hunted or fished or had rituals on the certain lands. And for the Tahale, that was both Muckleshoot and, come on, Yvonne. There are two tribes that I had to inform. I'll think of it, I'm sorry. So we send a letter, we follow the letter of the law, we inform, and again, most of the time we do not hear back. And there's a reason for that, is that when we're planning in an area that is of cultural significance, I can't know exactly what that is. We can't know exactly what that is, and the public can't know what that is. For fear of then the cultural resource being damaged, right? So there's a split in the pathway that happens then, where there's coordination from the tribes at the state level, and yet I'm going forward, we're going forward, the Recreation and Conservation Office is going forward in planning it because we are not aware. And that means that the only way we find out is too late, or after the fact, or projects move forward anyway, and that's really what's happened. I would say in the Snoqualmie corridor, tribes have had a seat at the table. Nothing has come up specifically to stop things. And so a lot of planning has happened, a lot of projects have moved forward, and now there is momentum in actually stopping that. So it's really tough, and that's what I'm trying to change now, is more upfront collaboration, and then really trying to figure out how to do that right. If we can't know exactly where the specific sacred sites are, can we be given some kind of guidelines in how we align our systems, our trails, our network, our access locations, how we avoid certain spots without being too specific, so that what we end up developing on the land ends up being respectful and does justice to the land, rather than working completely blind. And Sarah, I'm not sure if that answered your questions about outside the reservations, but yes, it is all the lands they have access to and are their usual and accustomed ground, which is significant. And the reality is that certain tribes still have access to those former resources, well, not former, the natural resources. If you're talking, coastal tribes who are still fishing, for example, within the oceans, tribes that are more isolated, such as Snoqualmie, now surrounded by urban development, it's more difficult to protect the areas, right, that are their usual and accustomed grounds. And so when you're talking about elk and Snoqualmie, Raging River is an area that's been identified to affect elk. The development and access and recreation is bringing more and more people to forage on the land between Olali and Raging River. That's affecting their usual and accustomed areas to forage, right? So it's very much outside the reservation and more of a landscape planning exercise rather than what happens within the reservation itself.
We don't have any other questions at the moment, Yvonne, if you want to continue on.
All right, so here's, and I don't have that many slides left. So just saying that our approach, like I said, we want to change this. There's been little to no direct collaboration, which means there really hasn't been any attention from our end to our side to figure out how to do this better and how to do it right. But we are right now in staff treaty rights training. We had one presentation. We have been trying to schedule a treaty rights training with Tulalip. It's been postponed twice now. All of this is pretty slow going. I'm trying to get it on the calendar again, but we've been trying for almost a year. So it's not easy, right? There's a lot of work and effort that needs to go into this, but we do want an all-day treaty rights training. The Tulalip have a wonderful curriculum that we'd like to get engaged with. I've been individually setting up meetings with tribes, like I said, Snoqualmie, Tulalip, Muckleshoot so far, Colville just recently in meeting with Shelley, just to listen and learn. So far, those have been incredibly informative, but no action coming out of them yet, right? So still learning, still listening. I've also been reaching out to tribal members who do ride, our own members. Some of you may know or remember Tim Banning, our former treasurer. He's a member of Colville. I spoke with him recently to get insights, and then have been connected to a couple of other mountain bikers who are tribal members to just kind of help me navigate this, but I could use help. And then, as I mentioned, our trail crew has now gone, anybody working in the King County area has undergone the cultural resource training with King County. They offer it about once a year for us. So that's what we're doing so far, and it's not all that much, right? So what are we really learning? So the landscape, the opportunities really is that we want the projects to become more collaborative, right? I highlighted the fact that we have an opportunity to at least get engaged with Colville on the renaming and perhaps also complete renaming of the trail system in the Colville National Forest. That would be done at a national congressional level. I think that's really interesting, lots to learn, and eliminating, as I mentioned, some of the references that the Colville National Forest is named after that are really based on quite horrible history, right? I think I'd like to get engaged if anyone is interested in participating in that with me. It is an initiative right now, I would say, that's slowly gaining momentum, but I'd certainly like to help Colville in making that happen. The other opportunity is Markworth Forest. So Markworth was the next planning phase for the Department of Natural Resources. Let's call it Tukul to Cherry Valley, right? That whole area, there's a plan in place. It was funded by the RCO that's now been put on hold due to concerns. But could we use that forest and move beyond a no to how do we do it right? From a local perspective, I really would like to look into that more. I think we have an opportunity, and probably the best possible opportunity, to take a blank network, right? It's not really a trail network yet, but a blank forest that has some informal uses on it, has roads on it, and needs to be connected, needs to provide some formal recreation opportunities. What can we do at Markworth to do it right? What can we learn there? And is this an opportunity to really just sit down with the tribes who care about this area and do it right? Learn. And then it's really just events and building together and perhaps doing research together. Can we do a recreational impact study on one of our trails? Can we learn? Can we teach together, right? And my hope is that we can develop a network that's culturally appropriate, right? It's informative for the people who use it. It's sustainable, and made for, to use Snoqualmie's word, inspiration, insight, and reflection rather than conquest. So those are some local opportunities. What can we do together? But really it's about relationship building, and it's about listening, and it's about understanding our role within this whole ecosystem. And that takes time, and it takes people, it takes local connections. And I can't do that alone. So I'm trying my best. I would love to engage many of you in this a little bit more, and then bring some ideas on what we're talking about today back to McKenna's DEI committee, to then actually put some action items together. And I think that's it. I've got one more slide. Let me take a look. Oh yeah, well, these are just the discussion and thoughts. So I'll stop there. That's the landscape in which I'm operating. Those are the opportunities that exist. So opening it up for questions. As I mentioned, this is probably it's by far the hardest topic for me to figure out how to get started, how to make sure that our mission is still met while also meeting the mission of the tribes. And they don't always align, right? Is when the tribes say no more in certain areas, which I had happened during a meeting with Snoqualmie. I could be pretty direct in saying, okay, well, how do we work together when those missions don't align? What can we do together? Because our mission still is about creating, developing, maintaining, right, sustainable trail resources. And so that doesn't mesh with no more. So how do we get beyond that? What can we each do? And Tom, to your point, really understanding our role and turn that into an educational message and a planning initiative to do collaborative work together rather than working in silos, which is what's currently happening. All right, I'll stop the share here. I've got multiple resources that I can pull up, but let me know if you have questions or thoughts or ideas, and Patrick and I will take note on how you may want to engage, what we might be able to do together.
Awesome. Hey, Yvonne, Vern had a question. I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer. He's curious if there's a defined document that we may or may not have access to that has all these sort of cultural significant sites identified. So is there a way, I think the question primarily, is there a way for us to sort of preempt any type of delay or cancellation of a project by just knowing where we should and shouldn't be? Is there, do you know of a document like that? Is there a document that we have access to?
There's no access. There is a document, right? So there is a database, and DEHP has all that information, but we are not able to see that. No one is. So there are some known sacred and spiritual places like Snoqualmie Falls, right? Cherry Valley, Cherry Falls. So there are some known sites that are well known around the region. But from a planning perspective, in a place like Markworth Forest, besides Cherry Valley, besides the falls, We don't know, we won't know, we will not have access to that for a very specific reason. And that is, once those sites are discovered, they will attract visitation and unfortunately are vandalized. I mean, I don't know if you all remember in April, the vandalism that happened in Moab. I mean, it's just horrible, right? And it happens. And so for that reason, we are not allowed to know. It's a strictly protected database, which makes this makes this so hard.
And then Matt's asking, he sort of feels like there's a target on recreation, and I'm curious if there's other resource management or resource uses that are also being this. And I guess my sense is probably recreation is probably getting a higher view now, and these other resources have been dealing with this for a long time. So logging and any other type of land use has probably already been dealing with this for quite a while. This is sort of a new thing for us. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this topic in general, and I don't know the history on how the tribes have worked in the past with the state when it came to our trust lands, right, our working forests. But I certainly have asked, and especially in meeting with Snoqualmie, if and when we focus our planning and development efforts on working forests and we try to avoid areas that have not been touched, does that make a difference? And the answer from Snoqualmie was no. Whether it has been logged before, whether or not the land has been affected through a human use in the past, it doesn't matter. Recreation is still bringing people onto the land. And the big impact is that the places that used to be quiet and places of tranquility, spirituality, reflection are now loud and visited and known. And so that was the answer I received from Snoqualmie. So it doesn't matter whether it is a working forest or a, pristine, pre-human contact, beautiful, wilderness forest. It doesn't matter. It's still the impact on the land. But in terms of how they work with trust lands and working forests and logging, I don't know. They are part of some of the conversations with DNR and the SUAC committee on when logging is being proposed and when harvest schedules are coming up or lands going up for bid. So I don't know, it's a really good question, but recreation is the focus at the moment.
And then Paul is curious about legacy trails that may or may not be maintained. Paul, I think we sort of answered that a little bit earlier. If it's a reroute or something like that, there probably will need to be a cultural survey of some sort done, depending on the land manager. But straight maintenance on existing trails, whether they've been maintained in a long time or not, is probably not too greatly affected on this. Is that accurate, Yvonne?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, Paul. I'm not sure how to answer it. I think if it's a formally recognized trail, then it shouldn't be an issue for us to do maintenance on it, right? If it's a complete redo, it becomes a planning process. I don't know. It's a good question. I think our focus and our sort of our lens is just to actually understand all of the landscape better. So legacy trails are part of that picture, but most of it is just how can we plan our projects and our trails in a way that is in collaboration rather than in separate silos, no matter what type of trail it is or no matter where it's located.
All right. We've got about 10 minutes left. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? I've made it so that you can unmute yourself. So if you'd like to say something, go ahead. If you hear somebody else talking, maybe pause for a second. But I'll just say that this is one of those things that Evergreen, that you may not be aware of, that Evergreen spends a lot of time and energy and resources on. Had a discussion the other day with an organization, and this trail projects are one thing. When you see our guys working in the dirt, that's an easy thing to see as far as where membership support and things like that go to. But it's things like this that are sort of behind the scenes and we spend a lot of time with, that really make a difference, and that it's really important that we do this and that we're spending time on it. So Denny, let me see if I can unmute you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I just wanted to say I would love to help however I can. It's something I've always thought about since I was a little kid. So I'll help however you want me to, Yvonne.
Awesome, Denny. Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit in terms of opportunities and what you all think we as a community can do, right? So Denny, I need to follow up with Snoqualmie. The two women I met with are awesome. They are leading that ancestral lands movement, right? I need to do a follow-up meeting with them, come back with what I've learned in talking with them, and then talk about some of these opportunities, right? So some of the direct feedback that I've received from our community members who represent tribes is work together, engage youth, create jobs. So why aren't we working on the land together, right? Why aren't we learning this by actually being on the land? And we're still just doing this sort of like, it's a paper-based action, and it leads to silos. And so the only way I think we'll really understand is to be on the land together. And that's not happening yet. But that's where, Denny, if you're willing to help, whether it is a conversation about engaging tribal youth, whether it is a conversation about us putting together some funds to identify a research project that we do together about the impact of our work on habitat, wildlife, and then how we can reduce that while still meeting our mission, right? So that's the key here is we've got to figure out how our missions can align. And I am absolutely confident that they can, and that there is a way to not just build sustainable trails, but regenerative trails, right? We can do this. We can leave the land better than we started. And then of course, engage and inform our community. And yeah, why don't we have folks advising us, informing us, and consulting us on the work that we do?
One of the things Peter Sherrill was going to try to be here today, but I don't see him. He's been reaching out to the tribe also to try to get them to come do a tenting day with us.
Yes.
And he did reach out to that group, I believe. And I do think he did get connection with them. But I mean, that's one way we could start, just meeting each other, just simply meeting each other and having each other, be able to say hi in the parking lot even, and let them see how we're trying to do this, that we've already been trying to educate people. And, how it does mean a lot to some of us that we get people to understand that we're not just out slaying the trail.
Exactly. And that's, I really appreciate, I emailed him back yesterday that he reached out, but that's one of those opportunities, right? Let's table together. Let's be on the forest together and do some education. So really, really happy to hear that he reached out. And that's what I had in my opportunity slide, right? How can we build together? Who can do that? Who can reach out? Tom, to your point, how can we teach together? Denny and Peter, how can we do events together, right? And then, how can we, and again, this is my idea with Markworth, right? I don't know if that's at all going to be reasonable or realistic or feasible, but is Markworth the opportunity where we do this right? Right? Is it the opportunity where we do this right? It is in the center of all things between Snoqualmie Falls and Cherry Falls, right? That whole landscape connecting, let's say, Snoqualmie to Duval. How do we do that right? Sarah, I see your question about what a sustainable trail means. So as a former sustainability consultant, I always think about that as well, because you hear that word being thrown out all the time. And for the most part, I hear this word combined with the term like environmental sustainability, right? So sustainable trail, if you really look at what it means, it's a trail system, a trail network that addresses environmental, social, and economic aspects, right? So for a trail to be sustainable, it has an economic benefit, it has an environmental responsibility and benefit, and then a social, right? So it services people, there's benefits to that, whether it's health, mental health, it benefits a community economically, and then it is done without impact on the environment itself. The trail, the climbing trail at Tiger Mountain, for example, part of that goes through an FSC forest. Most people don't know this, but that is a Forest Stewardship Council certified forest. A master link goes right through it. As a result, the DNR goes through audits every 2 years to make sure that that forest stays, or that section of the forest stays certified, which means absolutely no erosion, no runoff affecting water quality from that trail. I went on one of those audits, and we had to make one tiny adjustment, or DNR in this case had to make one tiny adjustment, but the trail functions just great, and it was deemed totally good for being in a FSC forest. So it's possible, it's doable. Nobody has defined that though, sort of as a term. People use it a lot. So that's something that we could come up with. That's something we could do, is what does a sustainable trail truly mean? If any of you are interested in that, I'd love to come up with, this is what Evergreen does and means when we use the word sustainable trail. And it has to have all three, the 3 E's of sustainability for that to be a meaningful term.
All right. Well, we just have a few minutes left. If anybody's got another comment or a question, now's the time to throw it in there. Otherwise, I'd just like to thank everybody for participating. It's been really great to do these with Yvonne, and thank you to Yvonne for taking the time for the last 3 sessions that we've done on this. And I know a lot of you, Vern especially, Paul, you as well, have made it to all 3. So thank you for your attention and support. So Yvonne, you want to say anything before we sign off?
I have a question, since we have a couple of minutes, Patrick. So some of you have been around for a long time, right? And this topic is really hard. I really am not an expert in this. I'm trying to navigate a landscape, and that landscape is it's changing fast. So from, Jason, Martin, it's so good to have you here. Paul, you've already been asking questions. Bill, in the Spokane area, right? Like what are your thoughts in terms of that engagement question that Paul asked? Like what and how, what do you think we can do now? Or how do you want to be engaged? Or how have you seen the landscape change? And I know we have 2 minutes left, but just quick thoughts. Martin, Jason, you've been around for so long. What can we do? How have you seen things change? Or Matt? Jason would like to be unmuted, Patrick. You can use your hand too, and then we know to unmute you.
Give it a try there, Jason.
Okay, thanks everybody, and thank you, Yvonne. I'll try to keep this really brief. I know we're running out of time. I think just trying to sort out a process in which, when we begin the planning phase, that we can engage tribal members in a significant manner, try to find some norm with them. And it'll probably be different considering the amount of different tribes and what their expectations might be, but trying to engage them in a different manner, because I see this becoming more of a reality for trail building and more of a consideration as time goes on. So I appreciate that we're getting in front of this, or trying to at least catch up to this topic, because this can be super impactful to projects later on. So I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, Jason, thank you. And I, like I said, I need help on this. So it's about relationship building. If any of you are willing to pick up the phone and connect with the tribes and the areas in which you ride, right? And create the relationship and set up meetings and ask the questions about what we can do. I am there to attend that meeting, but I can't make all the connections and do that statewide. So that's why I pointed out to you for a second there, Bill. You're calling in from Spokane, right? Like, what are we able to do there to move the Colville idea forward? I'll need a local lead. Denny with tabling and events, right? Locally, Snoqualmie, let's start meeting and follow up on what they're asking in their ancestral lands initiative. So it's really good stuff, and it's really like deeply, deeply, deeply rewarding for me. But it also comes with risk in that some of what the tribes want does not align with our mission. So how do we deal with that? How do we continue to provide the much needed recreation resources, and avoid the pressures and the damage that we're seeing as a result? There you go.
Paul?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul. We got just a minute here.
Yeah, just briefly, Yvonne. Yeah, thanks a lot for doing this session, Yvonne. When I'm out on the trails, I raise this issue with people when we talk about trail maintenance, sustainability, and new trails particularly. And they often ask, well, what are the tribal issues? And I've been able to answer that question very well. I think this has been a great backgrounding session to help bring people up to date, and also just spread the word, that this is an issue. We need to respect this and work with the tribes moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think that's a great comment to end on. Martin, we have all of the PowerPoints, so email me or Patrick and we'll send that to you. We also have the recordings. I don't know how those can be best shared, Patrick, but finally, I'd say to all of you, this session was tough for me. I'm not an expert in this. I hope it's still valuable for you, but let me know sort of what kind of follow-up you'd like to see. You now know the 5 issues of the challenges in the landscape that we're dealing with. That's by no means comprehensive, but it's what I've got in front of me at the moment, and I need help. If this topic interests you, please do stay engaged, and McKenna will bring some actions back to the DEI committee as well, and let me know what you would like to do on those, or if you have thoughts on that.
All right, with that, I will say thank you once again to everybody. We really appreciate you being here with us this morning. If you haven't already gotten your pound of traction coffee, there's my little PSA. They are doing a little promo right now that they're giving dollars back to trail organizations like us. So go online to our website and you'll find a link to that. Thank you all for being there. Thanks for supporting the trails, and we will see you out there.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.